I will honestly say I don't remember ever speaking a word to Esther the whole time she was there. We were never friends. We never spoke to each other, only on the set.
For almost 50 years, the truth about what really happened behind the scenes of Good Times remained hidden. But now, Jimmie Walker has finally revealed a shocking secret about his co-star, Esther Rolle. And it's nothing fans ever expected. The dynamic between TV's most iconic mother and son wasn't all smiles behind the camera. What was the real story? Was there jealousy, tension, perhaps even betrayal? Walker's revelation has sparked renewed interest in the beloved show, leaving fans stunned and eager for answers. The long-standing silence is broken, and the truth may change how we see Good Times forever. Now that the silence has been broken, one question still lingers. Were the rumors we've heard for years just exaggerated gossip? Or was there something real hiding behind the scenes? Let's take a closer look. Facts or myths? For nearly 50 years, people have been talking. Not on talk shows or magazine covers, but in comment sections, fan forums, and those classic TV Facebook groups where old shows never really die. And one of the most popular stories that always came up was Jimmie Walker and Esther Rolle never getting along. Some said they couldn't stand each other. Others said they barely spoke unless the cameras were rolling. On Reddit, one user wrote, "Esther Rolle never made it a secret her disdain for Jimmie Walker." The comment alone kicked off hundreds of replies, each one trying to piece together what really happened. On sitcoms online, fans were still debating it decades later. One user said, "I'm shocked they took their feud and made it public because there was no way they were going to win a fight with Jimmie Walker with the audience of Good Times at that time. He was the bread and butter of that show." And on Lipstick Alley, a post shared behind-the-scenes details from Jimmie Walker's own book, revealing signs of a deep rift. One commenter noted, "Jimmie felt like he was a punching bag, especially after being publicly called out in interviews." It didn't help that fans claimed to see it on screen. Every time JJ cracked a joke or delivered his signature dynamite, some swore you could see Esther Rolle tighten up, shift in her seat, or go silent for a beat too long. These weren't dramatic blow-ups. They were tiny, real moments that got magnified over time. The longer the silence lasted, the louder the rumors grew. People started assuming things. Was it about ego? Was someone feeling disrespected? All this brings us to this moment. Jimmie Walker is now 78 years old. And after all the guessing, all the back and forth online, he's finally speaking for himself. And what he said may settle one of the longest-running questions in classic TV history. What does it all look like from his side now? Let's hear it straight from the source. At this point in his life, Jimmie Walker has nothing to prove. And he just talked about what happened from his point of view. When he was asked about Esther Rolle, he didn't dodge the question at all. He said it straight. "We were never friends. We never talked. Only on the set. I wouldn't even have her number. We never did anything together." This is the exact part that seems very intriguing. The complete distance between two people who played mother and son on national television. How do they not have each other contact? For fans who grew up watching Good Times, this kind of thing hits hard. On screen, the Evans looked like a real family. But behind the scenes, it was a whole different story. There was tension, there was distance, and sometimes there was nothing but silence. Now, this is where we start to see the cracks. Behind all the laughs, something was cracking. While audiences were falling in love with the Evans family, a quiet battle was brewing. Esther Rolle and John Amos weren't just acting, they were fighting to keep the show real. They wanted real stories about struggle, family, dignity. But while Esther and John pushed for that, something else was happening. Jimmie Walker's character, JJ, started to blow up. The crowd loved him, his jokes, and his style. The Dino-mite catchphrase took off like wildfire. Then the network capitalized on the show's popularity, leading to a shift in tone and focus. Suddenly, it was more about punchlines than real problems, more laughs, less truth. And for some cast members, that didn't sit right. To some, it was entertaining. To others, it felt like the soul of the show was slipping away. Jimmie never fought that shift. He was doing what he was asked to do, and he was good at it. But that also meant he was becoming the face of something his co-stars didn't agree with, and that created distance. You could feel it, even if nobody talked about it back then. And now, all these years later, Jimmie's saying they were never really friends. However, it wasn't because they had a big fight. No, they actually didn't. They were just two very different people trying to do the same job, but in different ways. So now that we know how distant things really were, the next question is why? What was it that pulled them so far apart, even when the cameras stopped rolling? The real root of the conflict, the real tension on Good Times, didn't start with Jimmie Walker. It started with what his character became. You see, Esther Rolle didn't hate Jimmie. That was never the issue. In fact, she made it clear in an interview. He's 18 and he doesn't work. He can't read or write. He doesn't think. The show didn't start out to be that, little by little, with the help of the artist, I suppose, because they couldn't do that to me. They have made JJ more stupid and enlarged the role. Negative images have been slipped in on us through the character of the oldest child. From that statement, it's obvious the problem wasn't the actor. It was the role. Esther had a vision for the show. To her, Good Times was supposed to portray the authentic experiences of Black families in America, specifically those in the working class, who faced struggles while maintaining their dignity. The comedy had a place, sure, but once JJ turned into a full-on cartoon with loud clothes, catchphrases, and over-the-top antics, she felt the show was slipping into something dangerous. It wasn't telling the truth anymore. It was just depicting fun and comedy. John Amos felt the same way. Before Good Times, he was best known as the adult Kunta Kinte in Roots. A classically trained actor with a serious approach to storytelling, he played James Evans, the firm but loving father on the show. Like Esther, he believed good times should mean something. He said, the writers would prefer to put a chicken hat on JJ and have him prance around saying "Dino-mite," and that way they could waste a few minutes and not have to write meaningful dialogue. It was more like, the more the writers leaned into the fun part, the more disconnected he felt. As JJ's popularity skyrocketed, the writers began building episodes around him. The show started tilting in a direction that left less room for the parents, especially for the deeper, more serious storylines Esther believed in. This shift didn't sit right with Esther. She didn't sign up for a clown show. And you know, fans and audiences never fail. They picked up on the tension quickly, but the coverage wasn't always accurate. Over the years, several articles and magazines misquoted Esther. One headline made it seem like she couldn't stand Jimmie Walker. But again, her words were clear. She had respect for him as an actor. What bothered her was how the character of JJ had taken over the show's message. Norman Lear, the show's creator, later shared his thoughts too. He admitted he had hoped Rolle and Amos would have been more welcoming to Jimmie. Lear believed their coldness pushed Jimmie further into himself. He withdrew. Instead of resolving the tension, things stayed quiet, but not really in a peaceful way. No one threw tantrums or whatnot, but the silence between takes said enough. They worked together, but they didn't really connect. They showed up, did the job, and went home. Not enemies, and not exactly friends either. Jimmie, for his part, stayed focused on the work. He wasn't blind to what was happening. He felt the distance, but he kept to the script, delivered what the producers wanted, and tried not to stir the pot. He was only a young actor doing what the producers wanted. He played the role as written and stayed out of the way. What makes the whole story more complicated is that both sides were right in their own way. Jimmie was the breakout star. He gave the show energy. His timing was sharp, and fans loved him. But Esther and John wanted to protect something bigger: the dignity of how Black life was portrayed on screen. To them, this was more than just comedy. It was cultural ground they didn't want to lose. So the conflict wasn't about egos, it was about purpose. One side wanted to keep the soul of the show. The other got swept up in what the network was pushing. And when no one found a middle ground, the division hardened. This wasn't a personal feud. It was a creative disconnect that never got fixed. However, as the cameras kept rolling and the ratings stayed strong, something was quietly shifting behind the scenes. The tension wasn't obvious at first, but you could tell it was in the room. And soon, it would reach a point where no one could ignore it anymore. Escalation and exit when everything changed. Things on the set of Good Times weren't as smooth as they looked on screen. The laughs were real, but behind the scenes, the mood had started to shift. John Amos, who played James Evans, began to feel like the show was drifting from what it was supposed to be. In a 2021 interview with Essence, Amos said, "I left because I was told that my services were no longer needed because I had become a disruptive element." He explained that he often disagreed with the writers, who, in his view, didn't understand the realities of the Black working-class experience. "It was tooth and nail over what we felt was right, and our convictions were predicated on the experience," he said. "They were theorizing what my reactions or the characters' reactions would be predicated on a Beverly Hills point of view." This didn't sit well with the producers, and by the end of Season 3, Amos was gone. They wrote James Evans out by killing him off in a car accident. Just like that, one of the show's strongest characters was gone. Esther Rolle, who played Florida Evans, wasn't happy either. She was already uncomfortable with how the show had started to focus more on JJ's antics than the family's values. She thought it was becoming more silly than meaningful. In an interview, she said, "There's too much clowning on the show, and it's becoming meaningless. I feel that the show lacks truth, honesty, and sincerity, and lacks the quality it had when we first started out." After Season 4, she also left. The producers had leaned heavily into JJ's popularity. Audiences loved his catchphrases and wild energy, and the network saw ratings rise. But the heart of the show, the deep and emotional core, was fading fast. Esther Rolle made her return in Season 6, but only after negotiating for better pay and stronger control over the direction of the show. One of her conditions was that JJ become a more responsible character. She wanted the show to return to its original purpose, but by then, the energy on set had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Without John Amos, and with Esther Rolle coming back under new terms, the original spark of Good Times was dimmed. The family dynamic wasn't the same, and for many longtime viewers, the show had lost the thing that made it powerful. Critics started pointing it out, too. What began as a groundbreaking series about a tight-knit Black family had turned into a vehicle for one-liners and catchphrases. The balance between comedy and truth was off. Over time, the exits of John Amos and Esther Rolle became more than cast changes. They became a symbol, a sign of how easily something meaningful can get pushed aside in the name of entertainment. There's a moment in Season 4 when Florida, played by Esther Rolle, finds out James, played by John Amos, is dead. She stands in the kitchen, holding a broken plate, and screams, "Damn! Damn! Damn!" Up till today, people still talk about that scene, not because it's dramatic, but because it felt genuine. And that's what was missing the moment they left the show. By the time the show wrapped up in 1979, the cast was still doing their best. JJ stayed. The comedy stayed. But the foundation, the part that held it all together, wasn't there anymore. But John and Esther weren't the only ones with stories. Everyone else on that set had their own memories, some bittersweet, some surprising, and they've got plenty to say about what it was really like. Other voices, other memories. Once you step away from the headlines and studio tension, the real heartbeat of Good Times comes from the people who lived it day after day. And some of the most telling memories don't come from the center spotlight. They come from the rest of the cast, people like Bernadette Stanis and Ralph Carter, who saw everything unfold from the inside out. Bernadette, who played Thelma, has been honest about how things felt behind the scenes. In a recent chat, she explained Esther Rolle and John Amos weren't angry at anyone. They were upset with how the show was written. They wanted episodes to focus on real moments and family values. It wasn't about conflict. It was just a creative difference critics and viewers often missed. It was about the direction of the story, not about egos. She remembers the fun, behind-the-scenes moments too. Moments like when everyone was laughing between scenes, or making jokes with the words they had to say. She said the energy on set could be electric when the cameras stopped rolling. Jimmie would joke, the kids would laugh, and even Esther would loosen up when the pressure dropped. Ralph Carter, who played Michael, recalls deeper moments too. He once said he remembers watching the big on-air take, the cast hitting dramatic emotional beats, and sensing an unspoken seriousness behind Esther and John. But off-camera, he'd hear them crack up over something silly, like his stories of trying to fit into Jimmie's costumes. Those little moments reminded them they were a family without the drama. When John Amos left the show, it changed the atmosphere. According to Ralph, the room got quieter. Nobody had to say anything. People just felt it. Esther took it hard. Bern said it wasn't an easy day. Everyone knew something meaningful had ended. Still, Bern always speaks about Esther with deep respect. She said multiple times that Esther was like a mother figure to her, especially when she was just starting out in the industry. She felt protected by her. There were fun moments too, like the time Ralph pulled a prank on Esther with a fake spider. According to Bern, she jumped, screamed, and then laughed louder than anyone. The set could be tense, sure, but there was also warmth, laughter, real friendships being built in real time. Even when people suggest there was bad blood between the cast, Bern quietly reminds them it wasn't like that. She said clearly that there weren't sides or secret drama behind the scenes. Everyone had different opinions, especially when it came to the acting, but no one was rooting against each other. She also shared that even though Esther and John were frustrated, they never brought that bitterness into their relationships with the rest of the cast. It was all about protecting the image of a black family on television. They wanted the show to reflect something real, something strong. And even when things didn't go their way, they stayed professional. Now, decades later, those memories still carry weight. Bern says Good Times changed her life. Ralph says the same. They both look back on it with pride and gratitude. Not just for the success, but for the people they worked with and the lessons they learned. And maybe that's what matters most. Not whether there was tension, but how they kept showing up, how they made it work, and how, through everything, they created something that still lives on. They say the show must go on, but what happens when most of the cast doesn't? Before the lights dim for good, let's take a look at what it meant for Jimmie to keep going when nearly everyone else had walked away. Life after the storm. When the dust settled and some of the cast of Good Times got left, Jimmie Walker was still there. Florida was gone. James was gone. The family that made the show feel real had packed up. But JJ, he stayed. It wasn't about needing the spotlight. He had already become a household name. His famous catchphrase, "Dynamite," was everywhere. But once the show started changing, and the core of the Evans family was no longer intact, Jimmie found himself in a strange place. He was still the star, but the warmth was gone. In later interviews, he talked about it openly. The producers leaned even harder into comedy, and JJ became more of a caricature than a character. Still, Jimmie showed up. He kept filming. He honored the contract and wrote it out until the very end in 1979. While others drew a line and walked away, he kept working. Not because everything felt right, but because he knew what the job required. After Good Times wrapped, Jimmie didn't disappear. If anything, he got busier. He returned to stand-up, where it all began. Yes, before Good Times, Jimmie Walker was already making people laugh on stage. He started doing stand-up in the late 1960s, performing in small clubs around New York. He even worked at the Apollo Theater and did comedy for big musical acts. His comedy got him noticed, and he landed spots on shows like Laugh-In and The Jack Paar Show. So when Norman Lear cast him, Jimmie wasn't new to the spotlight. He had already built his name with a microphone. After Good Times, he toured across the country and reminded everyone that before his fame, he was a comic, a sharp one, with timing no script could teach. He also picked up guest roles in shows like The Love Boat, Fantasy Island, and Everybody Hates Chris. He even popped up in Airplane in 1980. Jimmie stayed visible, always doing what he knew best, making people laugh. Whether it was a 5-minute bit or a full set, he kept his rhythm. Off stage, he lived very quietly. Turning to his personal life, Jimmie has kept it private. According to reports, he has never married or had children. At one point, rumors flew about a relationship with political commentator Ann Coulter, but he shut it down, saying they were only good friends. He's admitted to plenty of girlfriends, but no long-term commitment. He's always kept his personal life out of the spotlight. In 2012, he released a memoir, Din O Might, Good Times, Bad Times, Our Times. It's raw, reflective, and brutally honest. He talked about growing up in the Bronx, the early grind in comedy clubs, and what it really felt like being the breakout star of a show where the writers couldn't agree on who the star should be. Now in his late 70s, Jimmie's still at it. Even in 2025, he's doing live shows, headlining comedy nights, and making people laugh just like he did back in the Good Times days. Life after Good Times. Where are they now? Once the lights faded on Good Times, two familiar faces quietly stepped out of the spotlight and into real life. But they didn't disappear. Bernadette Stanis and Ralph Carter each found their own way forward, and both stories might surprise you. Bernadette, who played Thelma, didn't stay stuck in the past. She became an author, writing books like Situations 101, where she talks about love, money, and self-worth. She didn't write for fame, she wrote to help people figure life out. She also travels across the country speaking at schools, churches, and events. Her talks focus on self-esteem, financial literacy, and how to build a better future. And after caring for her mom, who had Alzheimer's, she became a national spokesperson, helping others understand the disease and the people living with it. Byrne didn't quit acting either. She showed up in The Love Boat, The Cosby Show, and more recently, in BET Plus's The Family Business New Orleans. She stayed active, stayed sharp. She's also a mom to 2 daughters, Dior and Brittany. And over the years, she's spoken openly about what good times taught her, like showing up on time, keeping work professional, and treating everyone with respect. Ralph Carter, who played Michael, had already made a name on Broadway before Good Times came calling. He'd been in Raisin and The Me Nobody Knows. He even earned a Tony nomination before most kids his age had finished middle school. After the show ended, Ralph didn't chase the spotlight. He got into music, theater, and later education. He worked with the Audelco Awards and the Cultural Museum of African Art. At some point, he taught at City College of New York. He also stayed close to the stage, performing in shows like Ain't Supposed to Die a Natural Death with the Classical Theater of Harlem. And every now and then, he still shows up at fan conventions to reconnect with the people who grew up watching him. At home, Ralph built a full life in New York with his wife, River York, and their 3 kids. In interviews, he said he's proud that Michael Evans inspired a generation of Black activists and professionals. The role stuck with people. Byrne and Ralph didn't stay frozen in time. They used what good times gave them, but they didn't let it define them. Both built something bigger than fame. So, if you've ever wondered where they ended up, now you know. They kept growing, they kept moving, and they never stopped trying to make a difference. We knew him as the rock of the Evans family. But when the show faded to black, John Amos stepped into a different spotlight. Here's where life took him. John Amos. When John Amos walked off Good Times, he didn't disappear. He simply moved on quietly, firmly, and with purpose. In 1977, just a year after leaving the show, he reappeared on America's screens as the adult Kunta Kinte in Roots. There was something about that role that really stuck with people. It earned him an Emmy nomination and placed him right back at the center of the cultural conversation. From there, the doors didn't close. If anything, they opened wider. He showed up in films like Coming to America, playing Cleo McDowell, the fast food king with dreams bigger than burgers. Then there was Die Hard 2, where he played the sharp and intimidating Major Grant. On TV, he made his mark again with roles like The West Wing, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Touched by an Angel, and The Mary Tyler Moore Show. He was literally evolving. But Amos didn't stick to just screen work. He returned to the stage with Halley's Comet, a one-man play he wrote and performed across the country. In it, he played an old man reflecting on his youth under a starlit sky. He kept touring that play for more than 20 years. Offstage, he teamed up with his son to produce a docuseries called America's Dad. It was never about the applause. It was about the message it passed. He showed the world what a strong, proud black father looked like and made sure people saw themselves in it. Even in his final years, Amos was still working. He appeared in the pilot episode of Suits, L.A. in 2024, playing himself. It became his last on-screen appearance, but there was more in the pipeline. He had roles lined up in Capture the Flag, The Last Rifleman with Pierce Brosnan, and Devotion, projects that showed he was still in the game. Unfortunately, John Amos died on August 21, 2024, from congestive heart failure. He was 84. His death wasn't announced until October 1, 2024, giving his family time to grieve privately. When the news broke, tributes poured in. Some called him television's father figure. Others remembered him as a fighter for integrity, for respect, for real representation. And they weren't wrong, because John Amos didn't play strong men. He was one, on set, on stage, and in life. His career never chased the spotlight, but somehow it always found him. However, there's one final story that deserves the spotlight. The woman who held the show together, on and off screen. What happened to Esther Rolle after the cameras stopped rolling? And why did her TV son vanish when it mattered most? When Good Times wrapped, Esther didn't fade away. She kept acting, but only in roles that stood for something. For her, it was never about staying in the spotlight. It was about leaving behind work that spoke to people and meant something real. In 1979, she starred in Summer of My German Soldier and won an Emmy Award. Not just any Emmy, she won the Outstanding Supporting Actress in a limited series or special. She was the first Black woman to ever win in that category. That award didn't come easy. It came from a series of hard work. She kept acting through the 80s and 90s, showing up in Driving Miss Daisy, Rosewood, and I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. She also stayed close to the theater, doing roles that didn't always make headlines but made an impact. Whether it was a stage play or a quiet TV role, Esther always gave it her all. Sadly, Esther Rolle died on November 17, 1998, in Culver City, California. She was 78. The cause was complications from diabetes. Her funeral was held in her hometown, Pompano Beach, Florida. It was filled with people who understood her values, family, friends, former cast members, who saw her as more than just a character on TV. But one person was missing, Jimmie Walker. He didn't show up. He was the only major cast member from Good Times who wasn't there. We all know their relationship has always been tense, so maybe his absence wasn't surprising, but it still felt weird that he didn't show up. Even now, it's something fans bring up. They wonder if the feud ran deeper than anyone thought, or if maybe he stayed away because he didn't feel welcome. Whatever the reason, it left a mark on how the story ended. Still, her legacy holds firm. Her awards and personal items are now on display at the African American Research Library and Cultural Center in Fort Lauderdale. They include her Good Times scripts, her NAACP Image Award, and the gown she wore to meet the Pope. Every piece tells a part of her story. Esther Rolle wasn't looking to be a star. She was looking for something meaningful, and that is how she became a legend. If Good Times meant so much to the world, why didn't Jimmie Walker think Esther Rolle's funeral was worth attending? Was it ego or something deeper? Let us know in the comment section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. If you enjoy this video, click on the next video on your screen.